From the outside, my life looked normal enough. People who came over saw a clean house, neat meals, everything running smoothly. What they didn't see was the cost, that the person keeping it all together wasn't my mom or my dad, but me, their child. Well, at least I was supposed to be their child. In reality, I felt like a worker they never paid, a servant wearing hand-me-down clothes and carrying a last name that meant nothing. While other kids my age were watching cartoons in the morning, I was scrubbing dishes until my hands ached. While my classmates played sports after school, I was vacuuming, folding laundry, polishing floors. I don't remember my parents ever encouraging me to dream, to play, to just be a kid. They gave me tasks, not affection, instructions, not comfort. I wasn't their daughter. I was their unpaid maid who happened to also live in the house. The strangest part was how normal they acted about it. They never thanked me, never even acknowledged the work. It was just expected, like breathing. If I slowed down or complained, the insults came swiftly. Lazy, ungrateful, selfish. They said those words so often they began to echo inside me, like a label I carried on my forehead. At school, I'd watch other kids' parents hug them, pack them lunches with notes, cheer for them at games. I'd sit in silence wondering what that felt like. To have parents who smiled at you instead of barking orders. To be seen as a human being, not a pair of hands to clean up everyone else's mess. That's why when I say I wasn't treated like family, I mean it. I was treated like a servant by the very people who brought me into this world. Some of my earliest memories aren't of toys or laughter, but of dirty floors and the sour smell of bleach. I remember being so small that the mop handle was taller than me, but still my parents shoved it into my hands, telling me, "You'd better learn this now. It's your role in the family." Other kids in my class showed off dolls, toy cars, or birthday gifts, while I quietly kept my head down, thinking about the list of chores waiting for me once I got home. Birthdays were the hardest. I'd be invited to parties with balloons and games, where kids my age tore into shiny paper to find the toys they'd begged for. My parents never let me host a party. On my birthdays, there were no gifts, no candles, no friends running around the backyard. Instead, I'd wake up to the same words I heard every morning. Get up and clean the kitchen before breakfast. It was like the day didn't belong to me at all. Sometimes they'd make a point of buying a cake for my younger sibling, just to rub in the difference. The message was loud and clear. Celebrations weren't for me. My siblings treated me less like family and more like personal help. After dinner, they'd leave their plates on the table, knowing I would be the one yelled at if the dishes weren't done. If toys were scattered across the living room, it wasn't them who got in trouble. My parents would storm into my room accusing me of slacking off. Even at family gatherings, I was the one ushered into the kitchen, told to refill drinks, carry trays, and clean up as though I were a waitress. The humiliation sank deeper with every reminder. I remember once asking my mom why I was always the one stuck cleaning while my sibling got to run off and play. She looked at me with this icy calmness and said, "Because that's what you're good for. Everyone in this family has a role." I stood there, my little hands covered in soap bubbles and tears stinging my eyes, wondering what kind of role that was supposed to be, because it sure didn't feel like love. Even when I tried to earn affection, it was tied directly to my usefulness. My father might give me a nod, not even a smile, if I polished his shoes exactly the way he liked. If I burned the toast or forgot to sweep, he'd bark at me like I'd failed some sacred duty. There was no space to be clumsy, no grace for being a child. I learned quickly that in my house, worth wasn't measured by who you were, but by what you did for others. And in their eyes, my only value came from serving. So while other kids grew up feeling cherished, I grew up feeling like a tool. And deep inside, the resentment began to take root. My sibling and I lived in the same house, under the same roof, but it often felt like we belonged to two completely different families. To my parents, they were the shining star, the golden child who could do no wrong. To me, they were a constant reminder of how little I mattered in my parents' eyes. While I scrubbed bathrooms until my knees ached, my sibling lounged on the couch, scrolling through their phone or watching cartoons. If I dared to complain, my parents snapped, "Stop being jealous. Your sibling has more important things to focus on." Important things apparently meant existing and being adored for it. The difference in how we were treated was brutal. My sibling's report card, even if filled with B's and C's, was celebrated with ice cream trips, pats on the back, and "We're so proud of you." Meanwhile, I could bring home straight A's, and the only reaction I'd get was, "Now that you're done with schoolwork, go fold the laundry." Their achievements, however small, were treasures. Mine were invisible, brushed aside like crumbs on the table I'd probably be told to wipe next. Birthdays painted the picture best. When my siblings came around, balloons filled the house, relatives were invited over, and gifts piled high. My parents made heartfelt speeches about how special and bright their darling was. When my day arrived, it passed like any other, punctuated by chores. Once, when I asked why we didn't celebrate, my mother coolly answered, "Don't be selfish, not everyone needs attention to feel good." But apparently, my sibling did. The favoritism pushed us apart in ways I don't think my parents even cared to see. My siblings started to believe they were better than me. They ordered me me around like a maid, tossing dirty clothes onto my bed with a smug grin, knowing I was the one who'd be scolded if they weren't washed. They'd roll their eyes and say things like, "Why are you even part of this family?" I wanted to hate them, but deep down, I knew they were only mimicking the roles our parents had set in stone, them as the adored, me as the servant. What cut deepest wasn't just the chores or the neglect, it was the affection. My father wrapped his arm proudly around my sibling in public, introducing them as his bright future. My mother bragged about their hobbies, cheering them on even when they quit halfway through. I stood in the background, unmentioned, unseen, a ghost wandering through the house I supposedly belonged to. It dawned on me slowly but painfully, my parents wanted it this way. They needed me small, quiet, invisible, so my sibling could shine brighter. And while favoritism can create rivalry, in my case, it created something worse. A hollow space inside me where love and affirmation were supposed to live. All that was left to fill it was bitterness, and the gnawing question, why was I born just to be less? By the time I was 10 or 11, the differences between me and my sibling weren't just painful, they were impossible to ignore. I had eyes. I could see clearly who got the hugs and presents, and who got the mop and laundry basket. Still, every time I dared to ask why things were so unequal, my parents would look at me with disgust, as if the very question proved I was selfish. One afternoon, after a long day of cleaning and running errands, I worked up the courage to ask my mom why I had to do so much more than my sibling. Her response wasn't gentle or even logical. She crossed her arms and scowled. "You should be grateful. Do you know how many kids don't even have a home to take care of? We've given you more than enough, and this is how you repay us?" My father chimed in later that night, shaking his head in disappointment. "Complaining won't get you anywhere in life. Lazy people complain. Work builds character." And just like that, they twisted it into a moral failing. Not theirs for being unfair, but mine for daring to notice. It wasn't just inside the house either. Once at a family gathering, I overheard one of my uncles laugh to my dad, "You're lucky. You've basically got free help at home." My dad smirked, didn't deny it, and actually agreed. I stood frozen in the corner holding a tray of drinks for the guests, realizing they didn't even bother hiding it. To them, that was who I was. Not a child, not a daughter, an extra pair of hands. Moments like those planted seeds in my mind that grew like weeds through every thought. Maybe I wasn't loved at all. Maybe I really was just the help. Every time I imagined what it would feel like if one of my parents hugged me the way they hugged my sibling, I shoved it away, because day after day the answer became clearer. That kind of love wasn't meant for me. The more I realized, the heavier it became. I started noticing the way relatives praised my sibling for being special, while I was praised for being responsible. At first, the words sounded similar, but slowly I understood the gap between them. Special means cherished. Responsible means useful. One is about who you are, the other about what you do. And all I ever heard was who I was supposed to serve, not who I was supposed to be. By 11, I stopped asking out loud why things were unequal because I already knew how they'd answer, "Don't be ungrateful." But inside, I could no longer deny the truth that sat heavy in my chest. I wasn't being raised as their child. I was being trained as their servant. Everything else was a lie, designed to make me accept it. By the time I reached my teenage years, the resentment had begun to simmer like a pot left too long on the stove. Childhood had already taught me my place in the family, but adolescence lit a fire in me that refused to stay quiet. I was no longer a small child, easily distracted or easily silenced. I had grown taller, smarter, and angrier, and every chore piled on me felt heavier because I knew exactly how unfair it all was. High school was supposed to be a fresh chapter, a time when kids discovered who they were. For me, it felt like being torn in half. On one side, I tried to keep up with schoolwork, studying for tests, meeting deadlines, balancing projects. On the other, the endless list of responsibilities at home never stopped. As soon as the bell rang at the end of the school day, most kids went home to relax or hang out. I raced home to start another shift, washing mountains of dishes, scrubbing bathrooms, vacuuming every corner, cooking dinner before my parents returned from work. If I finished early, there was always laundry to fold or errands to run. Meanwhile, my sibling breezed through adolescence as though the house magically cleaned itself. They stayed late at school for clubs, joined sports teams, got to attend sleepovers and parties. My parents encouraged every hobby and smiled proudly at every performance or game. I'd watch them leave the house with laughter while I stayed behind, apron tied around my waist, stomach churning with bitterness. When I finally snapped one evening and said, "Why can't they help for once? Why is it always me?" the punishment was immediate. My father's face darkened. "You think life is unfair? You think we owe you?" he bellowed. "We sacrificed everything for you. The food in your stove, Mach, the roof over your head. This is how you repay us?" With complaints. My mother joined in, scolding that I was disrespectful and reminding me how lucky I was compared to children who had nothing. Their manipulation worked at first. Each lecture left me guilty for even daring to feel exhausted, as if I were selfish for wanting the bare minimum of fairness. But that guilt didn't erase the exhaustion. It didn't erase the loneliness of watching my peers joke with parents who cheered them on, or seeing girls my age walk into school with perfect hair because they hadn't spent the morning scrubbing floors. Week by week, my mental health began to buckle. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of being a full-time caretaker when I was barely old enough to take care of myself. My grades slipped, and rather than compassion, I got more blame. Maybe if you weren't so lazy, you'd keep up in school. Lazy. Such a bitter word, thrown at the kid who worked like a live-in maid while her so-called golden sibling lived freely. The worst part wasn't even the chores. It was the emptiness of never being seen. I wasn't starving for food, I was starving for affection, for recognition, for someone to tell me I was more than the weight of the baskets I carried. But whenever I reached for that, for a scrap of love, I was shut down. My parents trained me to believe that love had to be earned through service, and even then it was always just out of reach. Those years broke something in me, but they also awakened something else. Every slammed door, every guilt trip, every cruel reminder of how lucky I was only deepened the well of anger inside me. Anger that one day, I promised myself, I would no longer swallow. It was one of those big family gatherings where every relative seemed to crawl out of the woodwork. The house was buzzing with laughter. The smell of food filled the air, and cousins I barely saw once a year were running around the yards. For them, it was a celebration. For me, it became one of the most humiliating moments of my life. The second the first guests arrived, my parents pulled me aside, shoved a tray into my hands, and said, "Make yourself useful." There was no "enjoy yourself" or "go play with your cousins." While my sibling was paraded around the room like some shining example of success, I was ordered to refill glasses, stack plates, and make sure everyone else was comfortable. I tried to smile, tried to convince myself it was just helping out. But as the night stretched on, I realized it wasn't just chores, it was a spectacle. At one point, when an uncle asked how we were both doing, my father chuckled, gesturing toward me with mock pride. "This one? She's my little worker. She'll scrub, cook, serve, you name it. Never complains." He said it like it was the highest compliment, but my stomach twisted. I wanted to scream that it wasn't devotion, it was slavery, but my voice locked in my throat. The relatives laughed, some nodding as though this was admirable discipline, others patting me on the shoulder like I should be proud. My mother joined in, rolling her eyes dramatically. "It's true, she's not the fun one, but she's useful. Every family needs at least one of those." The words stung worse than any slap. Useful. That was my identity. Not daughter, not niece, not person, just property they could show off. Meanwhile, my siblings strutted around, being praised for their charm and talents. I caught sight of them laughing with cousins while I carried dirty plates to the sink, sweat sticking to my back. The contrast was unbearable. I wasn't just invisible. I was being displayed like some obedient servant they trained. I remember standing at the sink, pretending to scrub while my eyes blurred with tears. Everyone else was gathered together telling stories, filling the house with warmth. I was in the kitchen, hands trembling, my cheeks burning with humiliation, wondering if anyone saw through the performance. Did anyone sense how degrading it was? Or did they all believe the lie, that I was simply responsible, that I actually chose this role they chained me to? That night cemented the truth in my mind. My parents didn't just see me as a servant, they wanted everyone else to see me that way too. And the worst part was how easily laughter and nods from relatives confirmed it. In their eyes, I wasn't mistreated. I was disciplined, hardworking, an example. In my eyes, I was a prisoner on display, with no one to set me free. The breaking point didn't arrive all at once. It built like storm clouds that had been gathering for years, every slight and insult adding more weight to the air. But when it hit, it crashed so hard it felt like my entire world split open. It was a Saturday, the kind of day most teenagers spent sleeping in, hanging out with friends, or scrolling online. My day started, as always, with my mother barging into my room and ordering me to get up. "The laundry isn't done, the kitchen's a mess, and your father wants the garage cleaned out. Don't just lie there like you don't live here rent-free." Rent-free. Those words stabbed me every time, as if the endless labor I did somehow didn't count. I spent the entire morning scrubbing, dragging, folding, sweating, but no matter how much I did, it was never enough. By noon, when I finally sat down for 5 stolen minutes, my father walked in and saw me with my head in my hands. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't say thank you for the work I'd already done. He barked, "Why are you sitting down? There's still the bathroom and the lawn. Don't get lazy now." Something inside me snapped. I felt this wave of exhaustion, grief, and fury rise so quickly I couldn't hold it back. I shot to my feet, slamming the mop against the floor so hard the handle cracked. "I'm not your servant," I screamed, my voice shaking with rage. "I'm your child. I'm tired of being treated like I don't matter, like all I'm good for is cleaning up after everyone else." The room went silent for half a heartbeat. Then their reaction proved everything I'd feared. Instead of listening, instead of seeing the years of pain behind my words, my parents exchanged a look that dripped with smugness. My mom sneered, See? Dramatic, just like always. My dad folded his arms and said flatly, ungrateful. After all we've done for you. My chest tightened, hot tears streaming down, but they didn't soften. My sibling peeked around the corner, smirking, knowing they were safe in their golden child bubble. I screamed louder, years of swallowed resentment pouring out of me like acid. How every birthday meant nothing. How they paraded me around family gatherings like cheap labor. How I worked until my body ached, while my sibling got love and freedom. But nothing cracked their wall. My mother rolled her eyes. My father shook his head, turning my pain into evidence. Proof, he said coldly. You can't handle responsibility. You've embarrassed yourself. That moment gutted me. My outburst, the rawest, truest expression of my pain, wasn't seen as a cry for help. It was twisted into confirmation of their narrative. I was dramatic, unstable, a burden. That night I lay in bed, my body aching from both labor and the violent crash of emotions. I stared at the ceiling, replaying their faces, their words, the complete absence of compassion. For the first time, a chilling clarity settled into me. What they gave me wasn't love. Love doesn't break you down and then laugh at your pieces. Love doesn't call you ungrateful when you're begging to be seen. It hurt like hell. But somewhere in that spiral, I understood. I wasn't losing my mind. I was waking up to the truth. What I had mistaken for strict parenting or tough love had been abuse all along. And once I saw it for what it was, I knew I could never unsee it. The truth didn't come from my parents. It never could have. They had built their lives on silence and control, and for years I thought I would die, never understanding why I was treated like a second-class citizen in my own home. But the universe has a way of dropping shards of truth when you least expect it. For me, it came during a family gathering at my grandmother's house. I was in the kitchen, clearing plates like always, when I overheard two of my aunts whispering. One of them said, "It's a shame, really. That child was never supposed to be here." The words sliced through me. I froze, clutching a wet platter, every nerve in my body sparking. Never supposed to be here? I waited until the house was asleep that night and crept into the attic where I knew my grandmother kept old boxes. My heart thudded as I rifled through dusty albums, envelopes, and brittle papers until I found it, a folder stuffed with documents. Some faded with age, others newer. Inside, I found my birth certificate, and next to it, tucked behind a will I recognized from my grandfather, a letter. My hands trembled as I read the words, piecing together a story I was never meant to see. I hadn't simply been unwanted. I had been an obligation. My parents hadn't planned for me. In fact, they had argued endlessly about whether to keep me at all. My mother's family had pressured them, forcing responsibility onto my father, who clearly resented it. And as if that weren't enough, the inheritance paperwork laid out why I was treated differently. Everything, our home, the savings, the family business, was tied to my sibling. They were named as the future heir, the one expected to carry the family's pride and legacy. I, on the other hand, wasn't included in a single line. It was as if on paper, I didn't exist. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Why my sibling received affection, encouragement, gifts, and freedom while I was shackled to chores. Why my parents displayed me at parties only as hardworking rather than lovable. Why, no matter what I achieved at school, it was dismissed without a second glance. I was never being raised as their child. I was being managed as an inconvenience, a mistake, a permanent reminder of choices they wished they hadn't made. I sat there in the dim attic, letter clutched so tight my knuckles went white. The revelation should have hurt less than all the years of silent cruelty, but instead, it cut deeper. At least before, I could half convince myself that maybe their love was hidden somewhere, that maybe if I worked hard enough, they'd show it. But the truth made it clear. There was no love to search for. They had decided long ago that my sibling was the child that mattered, and I was nothing more than the unpaid servant filling in the gaps. I felt rage surge so strong it nearly drowned me, with every memory rewriting itself in my head, every punishment, every ignored birthday, every dismissal when I cried for fairness. All of it was less about me failing and more about them making sure I knew my place. They had clipped my wings before I ever got to fly. But here's what they didn't know. Knowing the truth, even if it devastated me, also lit a fire I couldn't put out. If they saw me as a mistake, then surviving and thriving would be my act of defiance. And for the first time, I realized freedom might not come from earning their love. It would come from refusing to need it. The day I uncovered the truth about my place in the family was the day something shifted permanently inside me. For years, I had swallowed the humiliation, bent under the weight of their control and convinced myself I just had to endure it. But once I saw the inheritance papers, the cold, legal proof that I was never meant to count, I stopped waiting for love that would never come. Instead, I began focusing on the one thing they couldn't take away from me, my future. I threw myself into schoolwork with a determination that surprised even me. Every grade, every test, every assignment became a stepping stone toward freedom. I stopped trying to impress my parents with it. I knew they'd never care. I started doing it for myself, for the person who had been silenced for so long. Teachers noticed, Friends noticed. Guidance counselors started pulling me aside, asking about college, scholarships, opportunities. For the first time, I felt seen, and not because of chores done or floors polished, but because of my abilities. Of course, I couldn't risk my parents knowing about my plans. If they thought I was building an escape, they'd shut it down. So I played the role of the obedient help during the day, all while saving scraps of money from tutoring classmates and part-time work I secretly picked up at a library. Every dollar I stashed away felt like a key slipping into the lock of a cage I'd been trapped in my entire life. The day I got the letter offering me a scholarship, I cried into my pillow, not because my parents would finally be proud of me, but because for once I didn't need them to be. I had a ticket out, and it was mine. That first taste of freedom came when I moved into a dorm. It wasn't luxurious. The mattress was stiff, the room small, but it was mine. I didn't have to jump up at dawn to scrub dishes or sweep floors. I could decide when to wake up, when to eat, when to breathe. I remember lying on that narrow bed, staring up at the ceiling, overwhelmed by the quiet. A quiet that wasn't filled with looming orders or guilt, but with possibility. I knew life ahead wouldn't be easy. I'd have to work harder than most, carry scars that would never fully disappear, but at least it would be on my terms. And every moment of independence, every step I took to build a life of my own, was proof. I wasn't a servant. I was a survivor. Years passed before I found the courage to step back into that house, not as their beaten down servant, not as their guilty little scapegoat, but as an adult standing on my own 2 feet. I had a degree now, a job, an apartment that was small, but mine. My parents expected me to come back the same way I had left, quiet, compliant, desperate for scraps of approval. What they got instead was a version of me they had never seen before. The first thing my father did when I walked through the door was frown and say, "Well, are you going to help your mother in the kitchen?" Those old words, sharp as daggers, would have cut me once. This time, I didn't move. I dropped my bag on the floor, looked straight at him and said, "No, not anymore." The silence that followed was electric, my rebellion hanging in the room like thunder waiting to crack. I told them everything. My voice shook at first, but with every word I grew stronger. I laid it all bare. The years of being worked like a servant, the birthdays ignored, the times they humiliated me in front of our relatives, the way they gaslit me into believing affection had to be earned through labor. I told them about the breakdown, about the moment I realized what they did wasn't love, it was abuse. I let them see my anger, my heartbreak, the pieces of myself I had been forced to carry alone. They flinched under the weight of it. My father's first instinct was denial. "You're exaggerating," he muttered, shaking his head. My mother's face, twisted with guilt and defense, rolled into one. "We did what we could. Life was hard. You should be thankful we gave you a roof." Their excuses spill, ed out, thin and lifeless against the truth I carried. For once, I didn't shrink beneath their words because I didn't need their acknowledgement anymore. I was no longer begging them to see me. I was telling them what they had done, whether they liked it or not. And when my father finally dropped his voice saying, "But you turned out fine, didn't you?" I stared at him with a fire I didn't know I had. "No," I said firmly. "I turned out strong in spite of you, not because of you. You broke me down over and over, and I rebuilt myself without your help. That strength doesn't belong to you. It belongs to me." My mother began to cry, half from guilt, half from losing control of the daughter they thought they owned. They begged, they excused, but none of it mattered. For the first time, all the power was in my hands. I wasn't the servant anymore. I wasn't even their obedient child. I was my own person, standing free, and they had no authority left to take that away. Walking out of that house for the last time, I didn't feel triumphant the way I always imagined I would. There were no dramatic fireworks, no perfect words left echoing in the walls. What I felt was quieter, steadier, like finally exhaling after holding my breath for years. For so long, I thought closure would come from their apology, from them admitting what they did to me. But now I understood. Closure was something I could only give myself. I didn't cut them off completely, but I didn't let them pull me back into old patterns either. Calls became infrequent, visits rare, and when we did see each other, I carried myself differently. If they slipped into orders, "Do this, do that," I looked them in the eyes and said, "I'm not your servant." The first time I said it, my heart raced, but each time after it grew easier, stronger, truer. I decided not to chase revenge. I could have exposed them to relatives, screamed their hypocrisy to the world, but honestly, I didn't need to. Their punishment was living with what they had lost, the daughter who no longer lived in fear of them. I found healing not by wounding them back, but by reclaiming the parts of myself they tried so hard to erase. I pursued dreams I'd buried under years of servitude. I traveled, I laughed too loudly, I bought clothes that made me feel vibrant instead of invisible. And every accomplishment, every joy, carried a deeper sweetness because it was mine, untied from obligation, free of their control. For the first time, I wasn't living to meet anyone else's expectations. I was living for me. Of course, the scars are still there. Sometimes I catch myself overworking, feeling guilty for resting, my hands twitching for tasks even when none are needed. But then I pause, breathe, breathe and remind myself, I don't owe anyone proof of my worth. My value isn't in how much I do for others, it's in who I am. That's the redemption I never expected. Not reconciliation with them, not some perfect storybook ending, but learning that the power to define myself was mine all along. I was never just the servant child. I am my own person. Someone who survived betrayal, rose from it, and built a life no one can take credit for but me. And if there's one thing I know now with absolute certainty, it's this: I will never again let anyone decide my worth.